Greetings everyone, welcome to my review of Archie Sonic issue 53. Today's outing will bring about some new changes, as if the events of Endgame didn't change things already. Before we get started, I should point out two things. First, this issue takes place after the events of Sonic Super Special number 2, in which our heroes journey into Robotropolis to assess the situation and hope to turn it back into Mobotropolis. Personally, I would have gathered any useful items and abandoned this place, in order to turn Knothole into a more functional city. And yeah, there's that whole time shift difference, but they can work around it. That special also had Sonic reuniting with his long-lost parents. The second thing is, at this point in history, the Knuckles spin-off comic has started. In fact, the first story in the issue takes place after the events of issue 6. You'll see why. We begin with everyone in Robotropolis spotting the arrival of, in their words, an unusual craft. Fortunately, its occupants are Knuckles and Julie Sue, and I take it the craft was salvaged from the remains of the Dark Legion base. After introductions are made, Sally for some reason asks if Knuckles and Julie Sue are an item, to which both of them say, nope, give it time. Anyway, since Knuckles hasn't been around for a while, Sally gives us a reminder and update of what's happened recently, namely that King Max was replaced by a robot duplicate for a time, and the situation with the Sword of Acorns, which Knuckles went on a quest to retrieve for Sally as a favor, and resolved in Supersonic Special number 1, or not, as by the end of that story, the heroes got a fake sword while the villain Mammoth Mogul took the real one. Eventually, everyone learned that their sword was fake after Sally failed to heal her father with it, and after being examined by Rotor. Sally asks Knuckles if he can once again track down the real sword. She would do it herself, but she's busy trying to restore the city at the moment. Again, why bother? This time, Knuckles refuses, and for good reason. Thanks to the Ultimate Annihilator malfunction in issue 50, the floating island has gotten a massive increase in the Echidna population along with some dingoes. Among the Echidna population is Knuckles' long-lost mother. Sally realizes the similarity of lost parents between Knuckles and Sonic and has Antoine escort Knuckles towards the Hedgehog. Julie Sue will remain with the others. Antoine and Knuckles meet up with Sonic, who wants a chance to thank Knuckles for helping him during the events of Endgame. This heartwarming moment is interrupted when Sonic's father, Jules, arrives, calling Sonic Maurice in the process. Learning that Maurice is his real name, well, his real middle name, has Antoine burst into laughter. Sonic manages to stop his dad from revealing his real first name, but the damage was done. Antoine heads off to tell everyone, and Sonic gives chase. Shouldn't this be short or something? Whatever. After Knuckles brings up his own parental problems, Jules says that all relationships have problems, and the good ones are able to overcome them. With that, we end our first story. The second and main story begins with Sonic and Sally standing over a cliff looking over Robotropolis, reflecting on the many schemes Robotnik cooked up in his lab and how his last one, the Ultimate Annihilator, almost doomed all of existence. Luckily, it only doomed him. With no more Robotnik, Sally has a new challenge, going from leader of a resistance group to an actual princess, which includes ruling over the people and dealing with problems like the roboticized Mobians wanting to move somewhere else, and the random zone portals as a result of the Ultimate Annihilator malfunction. And there's still the King's Crystal problem. The two are joined by our favorite skunk boy, Jeffrey St. John, who for some reason is wearing a cloak that wouldn't look out of place in a fantasy setting. Is he trying to be a wizard or something? That's cute. He tells the two that Rotor, Uncle Chuck, and Dr. Quack are investigating a Zone of Silence portal in Robotnik's lab, even going as far as to send a probe through, no doubt trying to find a way to fix the king. Sonic thinks this is a bad idea, and he's proven right when an explosion happens at said lab. They arrive to find a new group of menacing figures near the unconscious smart people. The ugly troll with a horn on his head introduces himself as Ixis Nagus. Sonic doesn't recognize him, but he does remember the dangerous Warlord Kodos. Anyone associated with that big guy is trouble. The two sides duke it out, with Nagus using crystal magic on objects, Kodos' big axe, and Spider Ninja Uma Arachnus' skills against Sonic's speed and Skunk Boy's arrows. Sally's out of her league here. During the fight, Nagas is impressed with Sonic's speed, but he has to kill him before he can take his place as the rightful ruler of Mobotropolis. That's odd. Sonic deflects Nagas' crystal attacks back at the terrible trio, stunning them. This allowed our heroes, including the recovered scientists, to get away for the moment. They make it to where King Max is recovering, and they fill him in on Nagas, his crystal powers, and his claim as the rightful ruler of Mobotropolis. Surprisingly, Max confirms Nagas' claim. He explains that after Robotnik tossed him into the Zone of Silence years ago, he struggled to survive, but ultimately he succumbed to the zone's effects, namely going mad due to lack of sound and vibrations. Before getting swallowed by a black hole, Nagas rescued him. The wizard figured out how to prevent this madness using his dark magics and the zone's properties. This resulted in the king getting turned from flesh and blood to organic crystal, which grants him immunity from the zone's effects. The cost was that Max would pledge his loyalties to Nagas as his knight, which meant everything that belonged to the king now belonged to Nagas. Also, while in the zone, he can switch between crystal and flesh and blood at will. Now that he's out, those powers are gone, which would explain why the king is starting to slowly turn into crystal. The king is exhausted from telling the story, and everyone's wondering if Nagas' claim to the throne is valid. Sally, who's currently acting ruler, says, "Screw Nagas, he can get lost." Well, that's when Nagas and his lackeys find them. The royal guards try to attack, but Kodos quickly takes them out. Sonic fares better thanks to his speed. Arachnus goes for Max, but Skunk Boy gets him to safety. Sally, to make up for what happened during the first fight, stole St. John's crossbow and uses it to shoot the bed's canopy on the Spider Ninja. Nagas is done with this nonsense and transforms his goons into crystal golems. That's not good. However, Sonic has been observing Nagas' actions. It only hits in front of living targets. He dares Nagas to hit him with a full energy blast, and Sonic's just fine, except for his gloves and shoes turning into crystal. Yep, Nagas can only affect objects outside of the Zone of Silence, and of course his lackeys. And thus the fight ends with Sonic stealing and destroying Nagas' wand. The aftermath leaves Kodos and Arachnus frozen like statues, and the wizard himself seems to have disappeared. But the good news is Sonic's gloves and shoes are back to normal, so I'd call this a win. While it may seem that the shorter first story should be at the end of this issue, I think the current arrangement works better. It's because things are relatively calm and peaceful in one story, then in the next one, it introduces new elements into the series and is more action-packed. The first story by Penders serves the following purposes. It gets the audience up to speed on certain events, and how Knuckles cannot get involved thanks to his own problems on the floating island. Which brings us to another reason for this story. It's to promote the, at the time, new Knuckles' spin-off series. Why else would Knuckles bring a character from that series and explain his situation to the Freedom Fighters? It's Penders' way of saying to the audience, hey everyone, check out what's going on with the popular Knuckles in his own book. Other than that, there's not much else. Besides Sonic and Knuckles reaching an understanding, Sonic's father giving Knuckles some advice, and the whole thing with Sonic's name. Well, his middle name at least. I'm going to cut Penders some slack on this one, since Maurice originally came from the first issue of the original Sonic miniseries. I will blame him for bringing it back up, and thankfully the comic never reveals Sonic's true name in story. In case you're wondering what Sonic's real name is, according to Penders, it's this. Yeah, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this. If Antoine learned of this name, he would have died in a similar manner to most of the weasels in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Final score for this issue is a 5. Like I said, this is an update and promotion story, which isn't a bad thing, and the art is fine, but it's nothing to write home about in the end. The main story, on the other hand, introduced what essentially is the next direction of the series, the threat of Ixis Nagas. I've alluded to this before, but it's worth expanding on here. Nagas was actually a villain that originated from the ABC's Sonic Saturday Morning Cartoon series, appearing in the episode The Void. He was working with Robotnik and Snively to exploit the Void, a dimension made of crystal. In a surprise to absolutely no one, Robotnik betrayed Nagas and trapped him in the Void. During his imprisonment, he either developed or practiced crystal-related magic. 10 years later, after confronting our heroes, he escaped and began his revenge on Robotnik. His vengeance was cut short when he and King Acorn, who was also banished to the Void and rescued, started turning into crystal. The longer one's been in the Void, the more it affects you. In order to survive, Nagas sent himself and the king back into the Void. While it appears that's that for him, the final episode of the series had a pair of red eyes behind Snively. They belonged to Nagas, who somehow got out of the Void again. Had there been a third season, he would have taken over as the main villain. Well, it seems the comic is kinda going in that direction. A wizard utilizing crystal magic escaping from an odd dimension, this time with lackeys. And notice that the cartoon version of Nagas had a tail, while the comic version does not. Maybe the penciler's going, it's not worth the effort. Heading over to Max, we finally get an explanation for his current condition, and all it cost him was the kingdom. So is that how it works? Pledging fealty to someone and that someone gets everything of yours? I did try to look it up, but I couldn't get a clear-cut answer. Well, when you think about it, the Zone of Silence is technically Nagas' domain, since he has control over it. And it might explain why Max was wearing that armor previously. Let's briefly touch upon Nagas' lackeys. We have the debut of the real Warlord Kodos. Previously, Sonic encountered a dream memory version of him in issue 43, and based on his experience there, he recognizes the threat the real version poses. And trust me, in future issues, we'll see how dangerous Kodos really is and really was. Uma Arachnis at this time is a mystery. All we know for sure is that she's a spider ninja that wound up in Nagas' services. It'll be a long time before we get any answers regarding her. I'm going to go ahead and give this story a 7. Sam Maxwell's art is okay, it answers some questions and does some world building, and the action's alright. Sonic displayed some intelligence on how Nagas used his magic, Skunk Boy is actually decent, it helps that Bowlers is writing this story, and Sally is starting to step up in her royal duties after having some doubts at the beginning of the story. Is the resolution a little fast? It seems that way, because this is all setup. I will reveal that Kodos and Uma Arachnis will return one day, and as hinted at in the final page, the conflict with Nagas is not over yet, but that's something for another time. Until then, have a good day. You know, Sonic, after all the times you picked on Antoine, let him have this one, okay?